A college woman's new romance quickly becomes abusive. Friends share their concerns with university staff only to be ignored. When secrets are revealed and the relationship ends, the young athlete fears for her life and makes pleas with the police that fall on deaf ears until it's too late. This is the case of Lauren McCluskey.
Hello, true crime listeners. Thank you for tuning back into the Abyss Pod. I'm Hallie.
And I'm Brittany.
And today we have a case for you that is going to be insane. If you didn't already take some guesses from the synopsis that Brittany said, it's going to be one that may tweak your anger just a little bit as it does us, but it's definitely an important case and an interesting case and one that needs to get heard all over the world. So make sure to spread this, share it, like it. Go ahead and give us a follow, a 5-star rating, and subscribe so that way you can stay up to date with all of our newer episodes that come out. During every episode, we will sometimes reference pictures or audio or videotapes, and if you want any links or even to see the pictures that go along with the case, make sure to go to our website, theabysspod.com, and you can access all of our information, our resources, photos, any interesting videos that we may thought were important to add, and even our audio itself. Also, if you are following along with the book club, don't forget that not this Friday, but next Friday, we will be releasing our Find Her by Lisa Gardner episode. And it's a lot to take in, a lot to talk about. So make sure you finish up that book and then send us any comments or thoughts you may have. We love to hear them. And we will even start a discussion online. So stay tuned for that.
So let's jump into the abyss. Lauren McCluskey was born April 12, 1997 in Berkeley, California. Her parents, Jill and Matt, were college professors, and when Lauren was about 18 months old, the family moved to Pullman, Washington. There, Jill and Matt took positions teaching at Washington State University. Lauren was said to be bright and extremely active. At just 8 years old, she set records in 3 track events at a junior Olympics meet. The next year, she competed at a national level with athletes across the country. Some of Lauren's records still stand to this day. She was dedicated to getting better athletically and would travel about 75 miles to Spokane to train with Chris Vogel in javelin. In an article from KUTV, Chris Vogel said, quote, "I was very fortunate to coach an athlete like she was. The part that set her aside was her humility," end quote. Even after a hamstring injury, Lauren kept working hard and was soon back out on the track. She was not just a gifted athlete, she was also a good student. She was passionate about animals, particularly cats. She spent spare time volunteering with the local shelter, making sure the cats were loved and cared for. She even did her senior project with the Washington State University Center for Animal Well-Being. Lauren was shy and quiet at times, but friends and family describe her as loving and incredibly funny. She loved to sing and came out of her shell up on stage, sometimes with her dad accompanying her on the guitar. She would also give the occasional stand-up comedy routine. She enjoyed performing, and she enjoyed making people happy. She was also admirably able to balance all of this with her academics and athletic endeavors. In high school, she helped her team place third in states and caught the eye of many colleges. When Lauren graduated with honors and it was time to choose a university to attend, it was a difficult decision for her. She had offers from schools in Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and even Washington State University, where her parents were professors. After months of weighing her options, she ultimately landed on the University of Utah as the best school for her. In a 2014 interview with the Moscow Pullman Daily News, she said, quote, "It was a really hard choice. I think the best advice was just go with your gut reaction of what you felt was right," end quote. The school was a great fit with a good track and academic program. And in college, she continued to train and dominate in track. She made wonderful friends. She studied really hard, even taking electives like grammar and philosophy just for fun. And she stayed involved with the community. Lauren would sing at church and even belt out some tunes at karaoke from time to time. She interned at a local retirement community where she put together a directory of the residents. Each resident had their information included, and Lauren spent time with each one of them to gather their stories for this directory. She loved to talk to people and really listened to them. Lauren excelled academically, athletically, and socially during her time in college, and by the fall of 2018, she was looking forward to the rest of her life as she applied for graduation the following spring.
On September 2nd, 2018, Lauren went out to a club with some of her friends to take a break from schoolwork. One of the bouncers really caught her eye, and they hit it off immediately. His name was Shaun Fields. He was 28 years old, tall, and had a dashing smile. After talking with him, she learned that he attended community college for computer science, and he seemed to have his life together. She ended up leaving him with her phone number in hopes that he would message her soon. The following morning, Lauren woke up to a message from an unsaved number and was excited to find out that it was Shaun Fields. He immediately started trying to impress her. He bought her flowers, took her out to expensive dinners. 8 days later, Shaun and Lauren were officially boyfriend and girlfriend. Everything seemed great at first, and Lauren was head over heels. It seemed like Shaun was too, until his loving demeanor suddenly shifted. He started to get very controlling about everything Lauren did, including what she wore and who she was allowed to spend time with. This is a classic form of love bombing. For those who aren't aware of what love bombing is, healthyplace.com defines it as, quote, a common abuse tactic used by narcissists and sociopaths to manipulate situations to their advantage, end quote. The website also addresses how love bombing is a key tactic for people who abuse others through gaslighting. Love bombing situations are detrimental to relationships and can cause serious problems. In fact, Health.com and Psychology Today stated that love bombing is even used by pimps, cult leaders, and gang leaders in order to form loyalty and obedience. Love bombing has a real impact on its victims, and it was obviously doing so with Lauren McCluskey. Lauren's friends became more and more concerned about her well-being. Physically, Lauren had lost a lot of weight. She seemed depressed and tired all the time. She stopped wearing makeup and taking care of herself, and she was having a hard time focusing on things, especially her studies. This wasn't like her at all. Her friends also noticed that Lauren had some bruises, and this made them very wary of Shaun and worried about Lauren's safety. Not to mention the stuff they weren't completely aware of. Shaun was going through Lauren's texts and emails, restricting when she could go out. He even limited the friends she was allowed to see and required her to constantly check in with him. Lauren was forced to walk on eggshells due to Shaun's overpowering, controlling behavior. Not to mention that Shaun was a lot larger than she was and could easily overpower her. Shaun would tell Lauren that he was watching her, which was more than just a threat. He would stalk her on campus and off of campus to keep tabs on her continuously. When they were together, he would verbally and physically abuse her, as well as make accusations about her if she had not answered his phone call on the dot. To make matters worse, if that even seems possible at this point, Shaun had lost his job, so he started living with Lauren in her dorm and relied on her fully for his necessities. He made her do all of the shopping and expected her to clean everything all the time.
On September 26, 2018, Lauren confided in her friend Alexandria Mumphrey. She had endured almost 2 weeks of Shaun's abuse, and it was really affecting her. Lauren told Alexandria how frustrated she was with Shaun's behavior and how sad and exhausted it was making her. She even confessed that Shaun was talking about buying her a gun so she could defend herself from other men. This is not the first time a gun had come up in this situation. Shaun had become friendly with students in Lauren's dorm so he could slip in and out and stay longer than allowed without having to have a pass or have anyone know. And at one point he showed the student manning the front desk a gun and even let him hold it. Now, Alexandria was already worried about her friend having seen the huge changes over the last couple weeks, and the mention of a gun just heightened her fear. She decided to talk to 2 other friends, Alejandra and Carmen, and the 3 girls agreed that the situation was escalating and decided to try to help. On September 30th, Alejandra went to Diamond Jackson, who was the graduate assistant for the dorm. Diamond was also friends with Lauren and personally knew that something wasn't right. Alejandra relayed what she knew to Diamond, including the changes in Lauren, the stalking, and how Shaun had basically moved into Lauren's dorm. Diamond then placed a call to Emily Thompson, who was the new resident director. Diamond thought that passing along the concerns over this ordeal to others in the university would mean that it was handled. Unfortunately, according to reports, because Emily was new to her position, she did not really know how to handle it properly and decided, instead of inquiring for help about it, just to do nothing at that point. Diamond also called Heather McCarthy, who's the area coordinator, to discuss this issue. Obviously, Diamond felt strongly enough about the seriousness of the matter And she even offered to go herself to investigate. She would go to the dorm and check things out so she could make an official report. But Heather McCarthy told Diamond that she was prohibited from going to investigate and accused Diamond of making unfounded speculation. She said pushing this matter would violate Lauren's privacy, and unless Lauren herself asked for help, nothing would be done. But Diamond, knowing how serious the situation was, refused to just drop this, and she really encouraged Heather to take a deeper look at the situation.
And that just baffles me because a lot of times we see victims that are afraid to speak up and afraid to take action because they're fearful for their life, and they rely on other people to help them get through that. So it just shocks me that Heather would say it's a violation of Lauren's privacy that Diamond is concerned for her friend.
Yeah, and not even to go ask her or talk to her or investigate not just the abuse, but the fact that he was living in her dorm and that was against the rules and things like that. Like, she could have made moves that were not just making assumptions or making Lauren do anything. She could have made Shaun leave because he wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. On October 1st, Diamond gave even more detail to Emily and Heather, suggesting that the situation showed classic abuse factors and signs of domestic violence. These included isolation, stalking, controlling, and jealousy. Diamond even mentioned that she feared there may be sexual abuse and exploitation, as Shaun had compromising photos of Lauren. These things, especially in combination with Lauren's demeanor and appearance changes, should have raised major red flags for all involved, but Emily and Heather said there was nothing the university could do without Lauren making the accusation herself. Anyone that knows anything about domestic violence should see the massive problem with this. Like we just said, a lot of victims aren't going to be able to speak up for themselves. It's kind of hard when you're in a situation to see the seriousness of it sometimes.
That's what we call love blind, where you're in it and you kind of disregard big things as being minor.
Yeah, so you can kind of write off everything as sort of an individual thing and not really look at the whole picture. But there were a lot of people concerned for Lauren, and that should have raised the necessary red flags for people to take action. It was said that maybe the issue of Shaun living in the dorm and having a gun on campus would be addressed, but other than that, just to keep an eye on it and leave it at that. They told Diamond she could make a care referral and that the situation would possibly be discussed at the next care team meeting, which was supposed to be on October 8th. Diamond was unable to complete the referral due to technical issues, but reached out once again to Heather McCarthy. Heather finally passed this along to two other staff members who, in what Lauren's family considers an empty promise, assured her that they would keep Lauren on their radar. No follow-up was conducted with this, however. The October 8th meeting for the care team was canceled, and no other meeting was set up at this point to talk about the situation. No one reached out to Lauren, no one contacted the university's Department of Public Safety, or put together any sort of report on what was going on. According to the legal documents of this case, the Department of Housing rarely reached out to the Department of Public Safety as a matter of policy because it was well known they frequently did not respond to calls and were generally, quote, unhelpful, and their tactics were routinely unproductive, end quote. So with this being known, instead of fixing that problem or trying to change how that response was, they just simply put it into practice not to contact campus security when appropriate. Up until this point, Lauren was trying to handle things on her own, but a couple of days before leaving for fall break in the beginning of October, she reached her final straw. Some reports said she saw Shaun's driver's license, while others say that a friend tipped her off that Shaun was not telling the truth. But however she found out, Shaun's lies began to unravel. Back in Washington for break, Lauren and her friend Regina dove into investigating Shaun. They found out that his real name was Melvin Rowland and that he was not 28 but actually 37. Even more disturbing was his criminal record. Melvin Rowland was a convicted sex offender. Lauren was completely freaked out learning this information, and she immediately knew that she had to end the relationship, but she was really fearful that he would lash out against her. She called Alexandria to update her on what had been found, and in turn, Alexandria called up their other friends. Unfortunately, as much as Lauren had uncovered, she didn't even know the half of it.
Shaun, who was now uncovered as Melvin Rowland, had a long and horrifying history. Melvin was a master manipulator. In previous relationships, it was confirmed that he had lied about his entire identity and background. He said that he had served in Afghanistan, played basketball, and was studying coding, etc. These few examples are key lies used by domestic violence perpetrators, but we will get into more of those details a little bit later. Just to cover some more of his history, we're going to go all the way back to September 2003 when Melvin was 21 years old. He arranged to meet up with a 13-year-old that he had met online for sex. It turns out that that young girl was actually an undercover police officer, and Melvin was arrested and had to serve time. 2 days prior to him setting up this meeting, he had contacted a 17-year-old girl online and met up at her parents' house and attempted to sexually assault her. He admitted to this attempted sexual assault in March 2004. Initially, Melvin was charged with a first-degree felony. After a plea agreement, his charge was reduced to a third-degree felony. Melvin was then sentenced up to 15 years in prison, serving concurrently. Paul Almond, who was Attorney General at the time, mentioned 2 reasons for this outcome. One was that the judge refused to use his 2 charges as evidence in each other's case, referring to the online setup and the attempted sexual assault of the 17-year-old. The second reason was that the 17-year-old had testified at the hearing but did not return to testify at the trial. After his conviction, Melvin was listed as a registered sex offender. While in prison, Melvin was forced to complete sex offender treatment, and he refused to complete the course for a while, which caused him to miss a few chances at parole. Eventually, he finished the course in time for another parole hearing, which occurred in June 2012, after 8 years behind bars. Melvin ended up confessing that he did, in fact, force intercourse with the 17-year-old girl. He added to that and said that he had also raped 2 other women. Disregarding common thought, Melvin was still released on parole the following month. To no one's surprise, I'm sure, his parole didn't last too long. He was put back in prison after 2 months for viewing pornography on Facebook, which violates his parole in more ways than one. A year later, Melvin was released on parole yet again. In 2016, he was returned back to prison, though, for violating parole again. He was caught trying to meet up with a woman online for sex. After being arrested, Melvin told law enforcement that he didn't want to get put on parole again. He even talked about hurting a parole officer, and he stated that, quote, if an agent were to come conduct a field visit, he might become violent, end quote. This statement brought up a number of questions they thought were relevant to discuss in the court, including if Melvin was actually a violent man. Excuse me, I will tell you the answer. Yes, period. Like, no question.
I don't even know how someone could look at that situation and be like, maybe not. Like, yes.
He could be not violent.
Yeah, like, there's no question about it in any way.
Melvin's lawyer, J.P. Broomer, was quoted by the Salt Lake Tribune saying, quote, I don't have his full file in front of me. I don't know if there are any incidents of violence in the past. I don't believe so. And if that is the case, if he has never actually perpetrated any violence on an individual, then I believe that threat against a parole officer can be taken with a grain of salt, as an empty threat. My recommendation would be that he be given another chance at parole. End quote. Obviously, this statement is ludicrous, and Broomer came back later saying that he meant that Melvin had no previous violence on parole officers specifically.
Which is not even a good save, because that shouldn't matter. That one specific situation does not overshadow the rest of the violence he's perpetrated, and rape is violent. So, just saying that, like, oh, I don't have his file in front of me. Well, you're his lawyer, so you should, first of all. And second of all, that you're saying that he doesn't have violence in this one little area, so that means that he's fine. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's just a ludicrous statement. A supervisor for adult probation and parole named Eric Barker also spoke at this parole hearing and was quoted in the Salt Lake Tribune saying, quote, in reviewing his history, I just kind of looked. I don't see any assault charges or anything that I'm seeing. We wouldn't be opposed to him seeking another parole, end quote. He also had his statement corrected by another member of the Utah's Department of Correction, in which they said Barker meant that Melvin had no assault charges since his last conviction. Which, considering the person and the situation, I don't really believe that. I feel like he probably did assault women during his parole and they just haven't come forward. The first time, he was only out for 2 months and he had already been breaking his parole. The second time, it was 2 to 3 years. There is no telling what he did during that time that went over the heads of law enforcement. At the end of that atrocious parole hearing, it was concluded that Melvin would serve the remainder of his sentence, meant to end in 2019. However, if Melvin were to attend sexual assault treatment again, they would reconsider. Of course, Melvin went and took the course, and he was released on April 17th, 2018. This brings us up to 5 months before he met Lauren McCluskey.
On October 9th, 2018, after returning from fall break, Lauren decided to set up a meeting to break things off with Melvin. She wanted to meet in a public place to be safe and hoped that she could be free of him once and for all. Before leaving her dorm to meet him, she called Alexandria to talk about what she was going to do and how it was going to go. And while on the phone, Lauren saw Melvin peering at her through the window. She opened the door to confront him, and he immediately barged into the room. He screamed at her and interrogated her over who she was on the phone with, and she told him that she now knew who he really was. Still lying, he told her that he was actually 30 and that the charges against him were part of some big setup. Melvin held her there overnight in her room, basically hostage. Her friends checked in on her through the night, but realized that Lauren sounded scared, and she couldn't really say much because Melvin wouldn't allow her to be on the phone without him listening in. The next morning, on the 10th, Lauren tried to smooth things over so she could escape. She told Melvin that she had track practice, but that he could borrow her car to run errands and go where he needed to go. And Melvin accepted that and took her car. Later that evening, Melvin sent a text pretending to be one of his friends. This text said, quote, "Hey bitch, your car is at stadium. Key in passenger seat floor. This was only a favor for Shaun. He never told you he was in the military reserves like us. Good luck, idiot. Go kill yourself." End quote.
Good message. Good message.
Melvin then called later and offered to bring the car back and talk to her. She declined, concerned that he was trying to lure her out of her dorm for some nefarious reason. She called her mother and told her about the situation, and her mother then called campus security to escort Lauren to pick up the car. Lauren initially declined, but finally relented and retrieved the car under the watch of campus security, and there were no incidents. It was said that Lauren indicated that she was not uncomfortable with Melvin being in contact with her, but I really have to wonder if she actually said this or said it in the way that they're insinuating, because she was obviously fearful that he was a violent felon and knew that he had access to a gun. She felt like he was trying to lure her out of her dorm, which you don't feel that unless you feel a threat. So I can't imagine she would just say flat out that everything was fine and that she wasn't uncomfortable with Melvin, because clearly she was. There were several times in this case that the police indicated that Lauren suggested or outright said she didn't feel threatened, but her actions were just not of someone who doesn't feel at least somewhat threatened, so I would really take that with a grain of salt. Women are often expected to minimize their feelings about being unsafe, so it seems like this possibly is one of those situations, especially with what we will talk about later. Regardless, Lauren got to her car without any problems, and the police contacted her mom, letting her know that everything was fine. Jill was appreciative and thought that security would keep a real eye on the situation now, but unfortunately, they didn't. The following day, Lauren began receiving a barrage of angry texts from Melvin's quote-unquote friends, and these texts said that Melvin was thinking about killing himself, then that he'd been in an accident and Lauren needed to visit him at the hospital, then that he was dead and she needed to attend the funeral. So Melvin had a busy day, and Lauren pleaded with this person to leave her alone, even telling them that she had the police involved. On October 12th, Lauren called the university police because the texts and emails just kept coming. Chief of Police Dale Brophy told ABC News that the messages contained things like telling her Rowland was dead and it was all her fault. One such text said, quote, "Shaun is gone because of you. Don't come to his funeral. We had his phone texting you. Cold bitch." End quote. Again, she responded to stop contacting her and that she'd involved the police, to which they responded, quote, "So do we," end quote. Lauren told the police she didn't feel immediately threatened, but worried that someone was attempting to lure her out of her room again, and she didn't really know why. Lauren was told that nothing could be done and just to stay away from uncomfortable situations and call back if things escalated. Without getting a good handle on the situation, the police just completely dismissed her concerns, leaving her to try to deal with all of it on her own.
On October 13th, the fourth day of harassment, nothing had eased up. Lauren was receiving more and more messages and emails from different accounts and phone numbers. She believed the people writing her were either Melvin himself or his friends. To make matters worse, Melvin started extorting Lauren. He had inappropriate photos that he had snuck of Lauren, and he threatened to release the picture if she did not pay him $1,000. Lauren followed through, sending the money to an account in an attempt to stop the harassment and protect her reputation. She ended up having to call the police again. Lauren talked to Officer Miguel Deras about the messages, harassment, stalking, and the extortion from Melvin. After their discussion, Lauren knew that they weren't taking her case seriously, and she knew she needed to get help. Alexandria, being such a supportive, caring friend, went with Lauren to the Department of Safety in attempts to get further help. They ran through the entire situation from start to finish, spilling out as much information as they could to assist Lauren's case, even letting them read through the texts and emails that she had been receiving. Unfortunately, they told her that she had most likely fallen for an internet scam. However, the University of Utah's Department of Public Safety ended up running Melvin's name through the university system, completely disregarding that Lauren had told them that he was not a student. They found the profile of someone similar and allegedly noted that he looked like a good guy, because looks can determine personality, right? Alexandria, whom we both love, the more we read about her, the more we love her, but she pulled up her own Google search and showed them a photo of the correct Melvin Rowland, as well as information that he was a registered sex offender and a felon. They then ran an appropriate check and found the information. I swear it had to be like talking to the wall with these officers.
Yeah, with all the evidence, with all of the timeline, her whole story, and the support that she had, they still just treated her like she was insane.
Supposedly, the University of Utah's Department of Public Safety still didn't know Melvin was on parole, otherwise they would have reported this behavior to his parole officer. Jess Anderson with the Utah Department of Public Safety mentioned a few reasons why they were unaware of his parole status. First, the Department of Corrections looked at him based on his ID number, not his driver's license number, which I don't really know, Britt, if you want to explain it, why there's a difference and why it even matters which number they look at.
I think just because they had an ID system set up with the Department of Corrections, so basically only people that knew what they were looking for would have that ID number, whereas his driver's license would be connected to like everything. So I'm not sure why they have separate ID numbers, but I think that's why the two weren't connected, which honestly makes no sense because especially for sex offenders, they should be monitored heavily. So having the driver's license used as the number would be a much easier way to do that. And then any situation like this, anything, that person would be connected to what they had done. So I really don't know. I'm sure there's some legal reason, but I really don't know why they don't use that number.
Second was that the public safety alert system notifications, which alerts whenever law enforcement asks about an offender, was overwhelmed with approximately 25,000 alerts monthly. So I guess they just didn't take the time to search or do their job.
Yeah, if the system is that overwhelmed, then it's completely ineffective. It doesn't mean anything. Like, if you have to go through that much trouble to just find one alert, they should really overhaul that and put it in something that people can actually efficiently check, because that literally could save lives and prevent crime.
Third was that Utah criminal history records do not note if someone was on parole, which just seems ridiculous to me and kind of inefficient.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of legal stuff surrounding that, and I'm sure someone thinks they have very good reasons to have the system that way. But again, that makes no sense, especially for sex offenders, especially in like violent crime cases. Like maybe if you're on parole for embezzlement or something, like whatever. But for violent crimes, especially sexual crimes against children, there should definitely be some sort of easy, fast way to just immediately see if someone's on parole, because especially in this case, Melvin broke parole in so many ways. Any one of those ways could have sent him back to prison. And if they had just been able to connect it, a lot of heartbreak could have been prevented.
And their last reason for not knowing that Melvin was on parole was that officers were not properly trained to check.
Which I think that's such a cop-out, that should just be common sense. Like, if someone says they're experiencing violence, stalking, extortion, like serious accusations, and you have the person's information, why do you need to be trained to check up on that person? Like, that seems like the first thing that should be done.
Like, you are a police officer. That is what you do.
So when you're investigating someone, your first thought should be, okay, let's see if they have a criminal history, if they're on parole, if they have a violent past, because that can help you predict what the future is going to hold. And there's no excuse for that being an afterthought, or that being something that had to be trained into an officer. If that's something you need to be trained on, then maybe law enforcement just isn't for you.
At this point, they basically brushed Lauren McCluskey to the side. Lauren needed help, and the people meant to help her were not doing their job. She was becoming more and more concerned about her safety. They got Lauren to fill out a witness report, even though she was a victim, and she was told to leave out everything except the extortion. How does that make sense? Usually when you file a report, you are told to put down every piece of information that you can remember about an event, even if it takes up pages and pages of information, because you never know what small detail may be detrimental to the case. It seems like they were just trying to appease her, and that was it.
They were just trying to rush her out, and as we'll talk about later, that was not a rare occurrence.
Before she left, the officer said that they would follow up with her in a few days on the 16th. The files were then sent over to Officer Kayla Dolliff for her to address. Lauren was rarely contacted by the police and was never informed about her rights as a victim. Lauren was fearful that his attempts were not going anywhere, so she contacted the Salt Lake City Police Department directly. We have an audio clip of that call that we'll play now.
I've been blackmailed for money.
Okay. Do you live in Salt Lake or Sandy or?
Salt Lake City.
Let's see.
Up on campus.
Okay. Let me go ahead and get you over. University Police will probably take the case then. Just one sec.
I've talked to them already, but
okay.
I just wanted to call you as well.
Because usually, if you've already reported it, usually we just take it where you live, and then that agency does a case. Because, like, if they make threats, the most likely they'll come is at your house or place. So you normally don't have to make multiple reports. Did they tell you to call us? Or did they take a case and give you a case number?
No, they didn't.
Okay, but you already did talk to them and tell them about it, or?
Yeah, I was just concerned because I wasn't sure how long they were going to take to.
Are you in line for an officer to call you? Oh, file arrest. Okay, let me get you up to them so they can see what's going on with it. Just one moment.
Okay.
Thanks.
You can tell in this phone call she's really trying to keep a level head and stay calm because she doesn't want to seem hysterical, but you can tell that she's still very concerned and shook up. She's taking the situation very seriously. The Salt Lake City Police Department ended up sending Lauren right back to the campus security, once again, just to be disregarded. On October 15th, 2 days after filing her witness report, Lauren called the University of Utah's Department of Public Safety to follow up on her case, but they were completely unaware of what she was talking about. They told her to call back later so that they could sort out the confusion. This is absurd to me, and maybe you can get away with saying that the officers she talked to weren't there that day, that she filled out the witness report and hadn't heard about it yet, but as we continue, you'll see that they just weren't doing their job appropriately. Lauren and her friends were all desperate for help at this point. Alejandra and Carmen updated Diamond Jackson on all of the chaos that had been going down, from Melvin's history, current actions, the extortion and harassment, as well as the actions of the police. Diamond was extremely concerned, but she felt helpless at the same time. She felt that nothing would or could be done about the situation, so she kept the information to herself at the moment. Sadly, no one had followed up with Lauren yet, and minutes started to feel like hours.
On October 16th, Melvin made a comment to a friend that he had blackmailed a woman for $1,000 and was worried that he had potentially made a mistake. He even made a search for sexual extortion online. Clearly, Melvin was getting more and more worked up and was escalating the situation. His parole officer contacted him that day, but no connection was made to the harassment, complaints, or any of the other things that would have caused him to be in violation of his parole. The next day, Melvin borrowed a gun from a former coworker Nathan Vogel, in exchange for $400 and agreed to return it on the 22nd. On October 19th, Lauren received more texts. This time the texter insinuated that they knew information about her contact with the police. These texts include things like, quote, "We know everything," end quote, and, quote, "Setting people up wasn't enough. Your sex offender boyfriend. It will go viral today," end quote. Lauren was concerned that someone within the university police department was leaking information about her case, so once again she called the Salt Lake City Police Department.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just, I'm worried because I've been working with the campus police at the U, and last Saturday I reported, and then and I haven't gotten an update.
Okay.
But someone contacted me today, someone who was harassed, and said that they know everything about the police.
Okay. So you already spoke to the campus police. Did this happen on the University of Utah campus?
Yes. Yes, and they haven't updated or done anything. So the case, it involves extortion, and those people are still reaching me.
Okay. So have you notified the campus police about this?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what prompted you to call Salt Lake City Police?
Well, I thought it was weird that that there are people who know about the entire case, and the harassers seem to know about it more than me. And I'm concerned there might be an insider who's letting them know about the case.
Okay. So with something,
because I haven't gotten updates.
Yeah.
And it's been a week.
Okay. With something like that, you would want to contact the campus police back and ask to speak to your detective. If you're concerned, you could ask to speak to a detective supervisor. Since it's another agency's area, the Salt Lake Police wouldn't be involved.
Oh, okay.
All right. And then make sure you tell them what you told me, that this is getting through to you from the suspects in your case.
Okay, so the detective you said is who I should contact?
Right. Call the dispatch back and then ask to speak to your detective.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. And then if anything happens, or if you see them when you're like out and about in Salt Lake City proper, not on University of Utah property, and for something like that, we'd be the best people to call. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Things were starting to get even more worrying for her, and basically no one was listening. So you can really tell that she was just desperate for help at this point, and she was scared that people within the university police department were not handling things properly, and the Salt Lake City Police Department didn't seem to care. So it was really just a bad situation for her. And again, she was told they could do nothing and to contact the University Public Safety Office, which she did. She contacted them again and told them everything, including the new concern she had, and that her parents were getting worried, hoping that this would kind of prompt some real help. Detective Daloff said that she was going on vacation, but Lauren could send her information and messages from Melvin, and that she would review it when she returned on the 23rd. This was the start of a half-hearted formal investigation. That night, Melvin went to a party wearing a Deadpool mask. Reportedly, while at the party, he grabbed a woman and refused to let her go until she kissed him. She did, and warned others to stay away from him the rest of the night. Between October 19th and the 22nd, Lauren received more messages, and Melvin was captured on surveillance video wandering around Lauren's dorm and places on campus looking for her without her being aware of this stalking. On October 22nd, 2018, Lauren received another message. This message came in at 10:39 a.m. and said, quote, "Good morning, Lauren. This is Deputy Chief McClennan with the University Police. I plan on calling you, but I'm in a meeting at the moment. Can you come to the station as soon as possible? There's something you need to see. I will go over details when we get you here. Thanks." End quote. Lauren didn't respond to this, but decided to call the police again. She called several times, leaving messages for Officer Darris, And finally, he called her back. She forwarded the messages to him, and he confirmed that it was fake and told her not to respond, but didn't investigate any further than that.
And see, that's pretty serious. That's impersonating a police officer, and that's a felon.
Chief Brophy told ABC of this, quote, "We later discovered Rowland was outside of her dorm room at the time, appearing to be looking around and waiting for her to leave," end quote. That evening, a care meeting was finally held, but no one in attendance knew much of Lauren's case, so it wasn't really addressed. Diamond Jackson was not invited to this meeting. Between 3 and 6 p.m., Melvin waited in Lauren's dorm for her. He sat around with some of the students he had become friendly with throughout his short relationship with Lauren, and at about 8:20, Lauren walked home from class, and she called her mom. She was in good spirits and seemed to be getting to the other side of this grueling ordeal she'd been going through. She told her mom that she had aced a quiz that day, and both felt like she was getting back to her old self. Lauren told her mom she loved her, but before she could end the call, her mom heard her scream no, and she heard a struggle. She heard Lauren pleading and yelling, and then nothing. Melvin had tackled her and dragged her into a car he had borrowed from a friend. He then shot her 7 times. While Jill kept on the line, Lauren's father, Matt, called 911 and told them that his daughter was in trouble. He knew she was on her way back to the dorm, but wasn't exactly sure where she was, which had to be such a helpless feeling. About 9 minutes later, officers arrived to the scene. A passing student found Lauren's backpack and phone and talked to her mom, who was still in the line. Officers searched nearby residence halls and the surrounding area, and students reported hearing gunshots, so a campus-wide lockdown was put in place. 18 minutes after shooting Lauren, Melvin was picked up by a woman he met online. He told her that he had been working out and needed to take a shower after they went out to dinner. At 9:55, Lauren's body was found in the back of the car during the second search of the area. There was a Deadpool mask in the car, and police quickly connected the shooting to Melvin and started investigating him too late. They found multiple phone numbers that he was using to harass Lauren. They saw surveillance video that showed Melvin stalking her. At 12:01 a.m., now into the 23rd, an alert went out that stated Melvin as a wanted suspect. Melvin was fully expecting an arrest for the extortion and now murder. Police caught up to Melvin on the street about 45 minutes later, and a chase ensued. Melvin then entered the Trinity African Methodist Episcopal Church and shot himself to avoid arrest. At 1:47 a.m., the alert was sent out that the suspect was no longer a threat and the ordeal was over.
Police searched Melvin Rowland's apartment and discovered a double pistol magazine pouch. They also found several spoofed numbers and multiple email accounts that were set to self-destruct after an email was sent from them. Police also searched Lauren McCluskey's room and found emails from Melvin and a calendar that marked all the days she contacted law enforcement. They also discovered that Melvin had hacked her computer and was able to access her web camera. As for the woman who picked up Melvin after the shooting, she was very cooperative and contacted the police immediately after seeing his image on the news, so she received no charges. As for his friend Nathan Vogel, he was in a little bit more trouble. Nathan Vogel, if you don't remember, was the man who let Melvin borrow his gun. Nathan had obtained the .40 caliber Beretta on September 8, 2018 with the help from a woman named Sarah Lady. Nathan had been discharged from the military and was concerned about his ability to get a firearm, or even that it might take too long, and he was a little impatient. So instead of trying, he went the illegal route and got Sarah to purchase it for him. Nathan had lent it to Melvin, believing that he was teaching his girlfriend to shoot. He claims he was unaware of Melvin's true intentions, and he continued to be cooperative with law enforcement. Nathan and Sarah were both indicted for lying during the purchase of a firearm and conspiracy to commit offense against the U.S. We have a direct quote from the Salt Lake Tribune that discusses Melvin Rowland, saying, quote, "Court records and audio from 5 parole hearings held for Rowland over the years show how his admitted violence toward women was minimized within Utah's criminal justice system. During the 6 years Rowland was moving in and out of prison, officials' focus was more on the parole rules that he had broken than the risk his violations posed, and he was released after each transgression," end quote. This is why Lauren McCluskey is dead. The criminal justice system in Utah let her down. She was putting her life in their hands. A vigil was held 2 days after Lauren's murder to honor her memory and push awareness about domestic violence, as well as a need for change in the system. Ruth Watkins, the university president, still provided Lauren with her degree in communications as well as a framed jersey, which is a tradition for athletes at the school. Lauren's athletic director, Mark Hallen, was quoted on ABC News saying, quote, "What's most important, I want her family to know that we are her extended family. We are here for them, and I always will be." The University of Utah received 30 recommendations for improvements, which they have completed most of, with the remaining few considered ongoing. We have a link on our website for you all to read the 30 recommendations, when each of them were completed and which are still ongoing. Just to give you some insight on the things that were mentioned, they implemented new training and safety protocols, including the requirement of a lethality assessment protocol. They also hired their first victim advocate at the university, along with a case manager with the behavioral intervention team and a resident outreach manager. A complete review of the campus police was performed to evaluate how they handled Lauren McCluskey's case, making sure that they acted accordingly, which it was deemed that they did not do their part appropriately. The Chicago Tribune said that the university said, quote, "The review team's report identified gaps in training, awareness, and enforcement of certain policies rather than lapses in individual performance," end quote. However, University President Ruth Watkins somewhat contradicts this statement by saying that the police do not have any reason to believe that the tragedy could have been prevented. This statement did not mull over gently with people, and the state auditor, John Dougal, was quoted in the Salt Lake Tribune saying, quote, "The university appears to place a higher priority on parking enforcement than the safety of its students," end quote. Dougal also mentioned that Watkins needs to be replaced and the university police should be disbanded and responsibility should be transferred elsewhere.
Which I 1,000,000% agree with. I think as long as people like Ruth Watkins are in charge of universities, literally no one is safe, and you can do 30, 50, 1,000 protocols put in place and it's not going to make any difference because people like her in charge just don't care.
Exactly. And transferring over the responsibility of Salt Lake City's university to the Salt Lake City Police Department doesn't seem like a bad thing. I don't really understand the importance of university police if they're not going to do their job on the university anyway. I think the Salt Lake City Police would probably do a much better job.
Yeah, if it was just part of their beat and they would go along as they do the rest of the city, there shouldn't be a separate unit to do it, especially when they can't even do their own job. They're not held accountable, and it's a whole can of worms that goes way beyond this episode, but it's pretty pervasive on college campuses as a whole that these campus police departments are just ineffective and at best don't reduce danger and sometimes even put people in more danger. So it just is absurd that, like you said, in the city of Salt Lake City, that the Salt Lake City Police Department doesn't just take that over. It's just important to sort of understand that a lot of these protocols put in place and recommendations and things like that, they look good on the outside, but then once you actually understand, and we'll get into this more later, but one example is you would think a law that makes college campuses more transparent about like sexual assaults that are reported and things like that would be good because you could make a better decision about, you know, where to send your kids or where to go to school. But in reality, that just pushes police departments to not report things properly because they want to come off as better. So on the outside, that law seems really great, but then you look a little deeper and it actually has put more people in danger than it's helped in that way. So just be informed of all the sides of everything, because obviously we can't just not have laws that serve to help people, but at the same time there needs to be a bigger focus on the people and not necessarily the regulations, because you can put a million regulations in place, and if you have bad people, poor management, bad leadership, it's just not going to do anything.
In February 2019, only 4 months after Lauren's murder, Officer Kayla Dolliff, who was assigned to Lauren McCluskey's case when she filled out her witness report, if you guys remember us talking about that, she ended up leaving her position for a new position in the Weber County Sheriff's Office. It was revealed that Officer Dolliff mishandled Lauren's case greatly. During the case, she saw Lauren's file with her witness report and then set it aside while she left on a planned time off. She planned to return and look at the case on October 23rd. Unfortunately, that was the day after Lauren was murdered. To further the problem, the following months brought about another case where a 17-year-old reported that her boyfriend had locked her in his dorm for an entire weekend when she attempted to break up with him, and she was extremely afraid. He also left her a voicemail threatening to kill her. Once again, Officer Dolliffe left for the weekend instead of following up on the report. Her new position supports Dolliffe and is comfortable with hiring her, saying that she has proved herself time and time again as a good officer. Brittany and I talked about this whole situation, and it just seems inefficient to leave a case while an officer is gone. This should not happen, ever, especially if the case involves someone being fearful for their life and at immediate danger. You think about people who hunted down Ted Bundy, and they didn't take weekend vacations. They had to solve a case that was putting other people in immediate danger, and you don't just go off and spend some solo time in the midst of that.
It shouldn't be that one officer's handling cases, and while they're gone, that they're just not looked into. Like, you have an entire department of officers. It should be passed off to someone who's there. If someone's in immediate danger or something is happening imminently, it's not just like, oh, can you get murdered on my schedule instead of yours? Like, you have to investigate. And the fact that twice cases were put off because of vacation time on one officer, that shows that officer and that entire department, for both of these departments that she worked for, is inefficient and doesn't really care about the victims. 1 year after Lauren's death, Jill was still fighting for awareness about domestic violence. She and Matt started the Lauren McCluskey Foundation, and they've worked hard to make college campuses safer. They take donations for college safety, animal welfare, and scholarships for athletics. They created a $100,000 scholarship for track and field for the University of Utah. Jill says that the university did not do enough after Lauren's death to change the environment that allowed Lauren's situation to become so severe. She told Fox 13, quote, "It's been a whole year and they haven't acknowledged any wrongdoing. They haven't taken responsibility. They haven't held anyone accountable. It's very important to me that her dad make things better. That's something I can hold on to," end quote. And I completely agree with her. Like, it's nice to say, oh, we've put these 30 changes in place, but Ruth Watkins is still in charge and the police department hasn't been disbanded. Things like that will really make a huge impact. Even just admitting that they did wrong. I know for legal reasons and lawsuits and all of that, sometimes it's hard to just be able to come out and say, like, yes, we accept responsibility. But even hinting towards that, I think, would go a long way, because you can't look at this case and say that everything went as it should have. And if it did go as it should have, then that's even worse, honestly. Jill and Matt filed a $56 million lawsuit in federal court against the university for the lack of protection after being contacted over 20 times about the situation Lauren was in. This lawsuit lays out systemic issues with misogyny and abuse within the university system. It shows that Lauren's case was in no way an isolated incident, and the handling of her case was actually basically the norm. Directly from the lawsuit, it says, quote, "The university, by and through Chief Brophy and John/Jane Doe, had an unconstitutional custom and policy of deliberate indifference to reports of sexual harassment, an unconstitutional custom and policy of treating women based on gender stereotypes, and were deliberately indifferent to other customs and policies that caused subordinates to violate Lauren's constitutional rights. Among other things, UUPS responded with hostility toward women who reported sexual harassment, treating them with disdain, accusing them of fabricating their stories, blaming them for harassment, and otherwise discouraging women from reporting the harassment or from taking actions against their harassers," end quote. The lawsuit goes on to say, quote, "A lieutenant at UUPS was well known for proclaiming and would often proclaim that women only reported sexual assault in situations where they, quote, had a bad time losing their virginity," end quote. So when you see things like that, that's not just someone being lazy and not doing their job. That's systemic misogyny. That quote alone carries some extremely heavy accusations of issues within that department. The lawsuit explains each and every time Lauren was failed and how that ultimately led to her death. It also explains specific instances where other women were ignored when they came forward with rape, harassment, and stalking accusations. There were repeated occasions where rape victims were interrogated for hours and hours with questions irrelevant to the crime. They were degraded and often pushed to not continue with reports. It was also reported that sometimes officers would not take notes, or that they would deny requests for rape kits or female advocates. Reports of sexual assault and domestic violence were repeatedly met with skepticism and hostility. Victims were ridiculed, dismissed, and degraded. In one instance, a peeping Tom was reported on campus multiple times. With nothing done, this perpetrator sexually assaulted a woman on campus. The university police did not respond to this report at all. Later, another woman was sexually assaulted by the same man. This time, the university police did respond, but it took them 20 minutes when they should have been able to be there in under 2 minutes. Another incident involved a student that reported rape. The investigation was closed without anything being done, and the victim was allegedly told to, quote, get over it and move on, end quote. And just a reminder, this was all University of Utah. This is the same department that failed Lauren so many times. So this is just within one department. Many similar cases were laid out, and if you want to read the entire lawsuit, it's linked on our website. It's about 60 pages. It's heartbreaking to read all of these stories. There was also reportedly animosity between the University of Utah Public Safety Office and the Salt Lake City Police Department. They would argue over jurisdiction, neither wanting to take responsibility in these cases. We saw that in the Paul Skiba case, and it's just so frustrating because you would think that when you say they're fighting over jurisdiction, that it would be like, I'm going to take the case. No, I'm going to take the case. But in reality, neither of them wanted to do their job, and they were both trying to push it onto somebody else. Even reports from officers that were concerned about how cases were being handled were completely ignored. According to the lawsuit, the UUPS officers were, quote, routinely trained and or instructed to take no action and to make no record with regard to incoming calls that involved reports of sexual harassment, and to take no action and to make no note of domestic violence cases where a husband or male partner was present and indicated that the situation had been resolved, even if the officers could see a woman cowering, end quote. So even in a situation where it was clear that the victim was still in fear, as long as the perpetrator said it was all right, then it was fine. University police were also being accused of training officers to falsify logs and to, quote-unquote, reclassify sexual harassment as, quote-unquote, suspicious circumstances to minimize these allegations. This treatment of women was not just to female students, but it also extended to female officers as well. Apparently, new female officers were hazed. This included officers, these are grown men, remember, peeing on the belongings of the female officers and in their lockers. They also had their keys stolen, their weapons were tampered with, and their equipment was destroyed, which puts them and other people in extreme danger. Female officers were also disciplined more often and more severely than male officers, and were the victims of frequent sexual harassment in the workplace. It was alleged that female officers had to deal with routine unwelcome touching, supervisors asking female staff to do things like sit on their laps, repeatedly asking for dates, and commenting on bodies of female officers. Female officers were referred to as the pussy posse, and one female officer was told to grow her hair out so she would be more attractive when asked what she could do to earn a promotion. Another female officer was stalked and harassed for months by a male officer. He eventually sexually assaulted her and was allowed to resign without reprimand. This environment was clearly a hostile workplace for women, and female students, staff, and officers all received this sort of treatment. So it was really ingrained in the environment of the Department of Public Safety and arguably the entire university. In September of 2019, the University of Utah tried to have the lawsuit dismissed, stating that they were not liable because Melvin Rowland was not actually a student. This attempt was unsuccessful, and in May of 2020, Lauren's parents and the university met to discuss a settlement, but no agreement could be reached.
So clearly the University of Utah has a lot of work that they need to get done with correcting their system and their staff, but as if it couldn't get any worse, it definitely does. Another horrendous discovery discussed during the lawsuit was an allegation against Officer Miguel Deras, who we mentioned earlier assisting Lauren during her extortion problems. It ended up that he had saved the intimate photos of Lauren McCluskey on his phone as quote-unquote evidence when Lauren came to him about the extortion issue. After she left, he proceeded to show off the photos on his phone to a colleague and stated that he could look at them anytime he pleased. This incident was confirmed by a second colleague, and both people confirmed that this was in a manner irrelevant to the ongoing investigation. Neither of them reported the behavior, and Darris was not reprimanded for his actions. The Salt Lake Tribune has many articles in regards to this case, and a lot of those in relation to this specific misconduct. A ton of them are posted by a reporter named Courtney Tanner. My girl, I love her. She pushes and pushes to get answers and has dedicated so much time over the years to Lauren McCluskey's case. Tanner spent a full year pushing for a public records request, which forced the university out of its hidden cave to acknowledge the accusation after a year and a half. Obviously, Dara's attorney rebukes the accusation, saying that the photo was on his phone because Lauren had sent it to him via email, which he should have just then opened on his computer, not on his phone, and that he showed it to his supervisor in reference to the case. This completely goes against what Darris' two colleagues had witnessed and stated. It turns out that Darris later mishandled another case, which led to his resignation in 2019. He currently works in the Logan Police Department. In order to follow up on the allegations about Lauren's photo, a thorough search was conducted through Miguel Darris' cell phone. The search took 12 hours and was mostly corrupted due to the purchase of a new phone. Supposedly, while waiting for his results, Darris told another worker that he was worried about what would be found, which is just a little bit suspicious. Overall, Darris had more than 150,000 quote-unquote artifacts, which consisted mostly of personal photos and videos we all have on our phone, but nothing was related to Lauren McCluskey. What was interesting about this, though, is that all of the quote-unquote artifacts were dated after Lauren's death.
So clearly something is fishy there if he just felt the need to completely erase everything from before that time. And honestly, I think if he did that to Lauren and, mishandled this other case, there's probably a good chance he did it to other people as well. Obviously, he had no respect for women, for victims, and for his job. So I think that really shows the kind of person that he is.
In response to this case, campus police decided to retrain officers on how to properly handle evidence.
Which, there again, you can put in regulations and training and all this stuff. You can't train someone to be a good person if they're like that. So the thing that would help that is not new training, is not all this new stuff. It's to reprimand officers that do things wrong, to call them out, and to not accept it.
I agree. Once they do something wrong and they're not reprimanded for it, it just shows that this kind of behavior doesn't get punished, and it supports positive reinforcement of them being able to continue these behaviors.
Exactly. And it's just going to get worse because if they can get away with one thing, they're going to try a little bit more. And when you have that much power and that much responsibility, they need to be held accountable at a much higher rate than anyone else. But if you think about, you work in an office and you mess up your job and you mishandle records and you do all this stuff, you're going to get fired or at least punished or demoted or something. But why are the police here in this case and many other cases not held responsible at all?
Exactly. You work at Harris Teeter and say you're short $20 on your cash register, you're automatically put on hold and you're being watched for a certain amount of time. It could be that you just handed out an extra $20 bill by accident, but you're still going to be put on hold. You automatically get reprimanded right there. It's not just a warning. You get put on hold immediately.
When we hold that situation as serious as this one, it's just absurd. It's no wonder that things like this just carry on, because all they do is slap a Band-Aid on it and say, well, we have new training and regulations. But you can't train someone to just be a decent person. That has to come from you enforcing your regulations and reprimanding people and publicly distancing yourself from it, not just always covering for them and dismissing it, pushing it under the rug and being like, oh, it's fine. And, resignation without reprimand, things like that.
And I understand we've talked about before when we've watched things about Stephen Avery and the police officers in those kind of cases, how you bring up one thing that they've done wrong and a whole nother bag of worms is opened and a whole bunch of other cases are brought into question. But I know it's a hassle. I know it's inconvenient, but I'll be damned if it's not necessary.
Absolutely. These are people's lives, their well-being, their futures that are on the line. It's not just nothing. It's everything.
As of this year, 2020, the Logan PD started an internal affairs investigation and to Officer Miguel Deras. The McCluskey family lawyer plans to file a separate lawsuit in state court that adds the allegations of Deras flaunting inappropriate photos of Lauren, who was a victim. The Lauren McCluskey case was also discussed on NBC's Dateline in an episode called She Did Everything Right. If you want to see more about the case, Josh Mankiewicz made a statement to the Salt Lake Tribune saying, quote, "You can't tell the story of Lauren's murder without also telling the story of how many times she reached out for help to those whom she thought were going to protect her," end quote. A new police chief, Rodney Chapman, started an external investigation by the Utah Department of Public Safety. A new law was also brought up called Lauren's Law, which holds gun owners accountable for any actions committed by their guns, whether it was in their own hands or not. Since Lauren had such a fondness for animals, specifically our feline friends, the Whitman County Humane Society made an expansion for a cat wing in honor of Lauren. It creates enough space to double the amount of cats being helped by the Humane Society. If you want to donate to the cause, to help animals, or raise awareness about the fight against domestic violence, you can go to laurenmccluskey.org to do so.
Dating and domestic violence are extremely prevalent across the entire planet. And in the U.S., the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence states that almost 20 people per minute are physically abused by a partner. That adds up to 10 million people per year, more than the entire population of New York City. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men have experienced severe physical violence, sexual violence, and stalking from a partner. Nearly 20 million women and 5 million men are stalked, many of these by intimate partners. The Bureau of Justice Statistics states that almost a fourth of women reported experiencing abusive dating behaviors. Women 16 to 24 have the highest rate of intimate partner violence. That's 3 times the national average. This gets even more grim when you break it down into racial and socioeconomic demographics. 3/4 of abusers that end up killing their partners stalked that person beforehand. Abuser risk factors and red flags include moving quickly in a relationship, isolating the victim, controlling activities and appearance, extreme jealousy, chronic unemployment, stalking, threats of violence and suicide, lying about the past, especially about military service and other sort of hero status things, because narcissists like the credit and the recognition without actually doing anything. Melvin really checked every single one of those boxes, and more beyond that. There wasn't a red flag in domestic violence he didn't put up. All in all, 1/3 of felony defendants were charged with domestic abuse. For women, leaving an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time and when the most abuse and homicide occurs. 60% of dating violence happens after the relationship is over. These statistics are super alarming, but it's also stated that an estimated 70% of spousal violence is not even reported. So that makes it so much worse. Jen Oxborough, the executive director of the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, stated that in Lauren's case, multiple red flags were overlooked, including 3 of the top 10 risk factors for domestic and dating violence, which were the stalking, the extortion, and access to a firearm. So many people failed Lauren as she and her friends and family desperately looked for help.
That even more raises the alarm about the University of Utah police, because if Lauren's case was raising many red flags, the top 3 that are 10 risk factors, that's something that I believe law enforcement should know and be aware of if they're working in that field, to know to be able to look out for it if someone is reporting something. So the fact that she was exemplifying 3 of the top risk factors of domestic and dating violence just shows how little they were paying attention to her case. Not that law enforcement has to know every single piece of what is considered a domestic violence situation, but they should at least know the top traits of domestic violence situations.
Yeah, and be able to connect that when someone makes a report. I know when I started at my last college, I had to go to a seminar about Title IX, which was like looking out for dating violence and sexual violence, about consent and all kinds of stuff like that. So you know that it's out there. Title IX is a nationwide thing. So the information is out there. And when someone makes a report, they should be able to look at it against those things and really make an assessment. Especially, we just said, ages 16 to 24 is the most at-risk demographic, and most women in college are in that age group. So You know that it's out there. You know that it's happening. And like you said, they can't know every single thing that goes on, but the fact that women come to them with these problems and they're just dismissed and ignored, that's the problem. Lauren really did everything right. She confided in friends and family. She contacted authorities. She kept records of when she made contact with police. And the fact that none of that prevented the tragedy is really devastating. But a lot of these situations can be prevented by just speaking up. And if you or someone you know is experiencing violence and can do so safely, confide in friends and family. Check in on your friends. If their demeanor has changed, if you're noticing weight loss or grades dropping or things like that, check in on them and see what's going on. Keep detailed records of incidents, injuries, dates, hospital stays, anything like that. Unfortunately, these things are not possible for everyone, but keeping them in mind can really mitigate abuse and help friends and family that are going through it. The number for the United States National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. We have more resources listed on our website under the resources tab, and we will also have them listed in the show notes for this episode. Another huge thing you can do is check into your local law enforcement departments. Become educated on their histories, their practices, policies, allegations. Understand how they've handled things in the past and maybe what you can do to help push things along in the future. Make sure you vote in local elections and really be educated in your community of what's happening. I think so many people just take it for granted that the police are going to do their job and help people, but the less that we look at them and the less transparent that is, the more they're going to try to get away with not doing their job. We really have to hold law enforcement accountable, and victims of domestic and sexual violence are dismissed and just brushed off completely. Systemic misogyny is literally killing women and keeping them at risk, and the lack of care for victims just makes it so much harder to solve cases and bring real justice. It makes it harder for women to speak up for their experiences. It makes it harder for anyone to be taken seriously when they accuse someone. So it's so important. I know the state that we live in has the highest known number of untested rape kits. I think it's somewhere around 10,000. And that kind of thing just puts people at risk. And you can go around all day about funding and all this stuff, but that should be a priority. That could take violent offenders off the street. That could save women in the future from being sexually assaulted. So things like that are so important just to look into in your local community, your city, your state, and just be aware. To do better for victims, we really need to be educated and informed and hold the people in power accountable. We're going to end on this quote from Mary Sanchez of the Chicago Tribune. She said, quote, "We tell young women to be careful when agreeing to go on a date, to watch for signs of ill intent, to know red flags of stalkers and possessive men, and to go to law enforcement authorities if they are fearful for their safety." Lauren McCluskey did all of this and more, repeatedly. Why wasn't that enough? Until there's a straight, unvarnished answer from the University of Utah community and institutions like it elsewhere, we won't be able to keep women's lives safe. End quote.
We know that the topic today was really heavy, and it's something that needs to be told and the awareness needs to be raised about it. And we hope that you will help us with this platform we have by sharing it and telling your friends about the Lauren McCluskey case. If you are able to, please go and donate to laurenmccluskey.org. Help out the family, help out raise awareness about domestic violence, help out animals. It's a great cause, and if you're able to, we highly recommend going and donating. Thank you, though, so much for tuning in with us today. And as always, we are looking forward to talking with you next time.
Thanks for jumping into the abyss with us.
Bye. Officer Miguel Deras. No. Okay. Miguel Deras, who was Miguel. Another horrendous discovery discussed during the lawsuit was an allegation against Officer Miguel Deras. What did you say? Miguel. Not Miguel. Miguel, okay. Another horrendous discovery discussed during the lawsuit was an allegation against Officer Miguel.